Are you seeking fulfillment for your life? Do you want freedom from fear? That's why we're here. Welcome to Jesus 101, introducing you to the real Jesus. And now, here's your host, Elizabeth Talbot.
Welcome to Jesus 101. We are continuing our series in the Gospel of Luke, and I'm so glad you joined us for this one because this particular segment is one of my favorite of all times. Before we go to Luke chapter 9 and to Exodus and to Revelation, we're going to be all over the Bible. I want to tell you a story about a fork. Actually, the story is about a woman who was in her deathbed, and she called the pastor. You know, sometimes we have this profound moment when we get to plan a funeral with somebody that is dying. And this was the case with this particular pastor. So the woman was saying to him, well, this is the person I want to sing at my funeral, and this is the person who's going to give my biography, etc., etc. And at the end, she gives this pastor a very strange instruction. She says, I want to make sure that when I'm in the casket, you put a fork in my hand. And the pastor thought he hadn't really heard right. And so he said, excuse me, I don't think I heard you right. She says, oh, yes, please. When I'm dead in the casket, make sure you put a fork in my hand. And he said, well, what for? She says, it's because everybody's going to ask you why I'm holding a fork. And this is what you're going to tell them. That when we used to be in church, in potlucks, you know, potlucks is those times where everybody brings different dishes and we just eat all together after church. She says, when we were in potlucks and I ate my main meal and somebody took my plate and they said, keep your fork. She says, I knew that the best was still to come because dessert was coming. She says, I want to give this testimony when I'm dead, that I'm holding a fork because I know the best is still to come. What a wonderful way to die, isn't it? With this assurance of salvation that the best is still to come. And it's not just a wonderful way to die, it's a wonderful way to live with a fork in your hand saying, hey, I know, I have assurance from the cross. I know the best is still to come. Well, I wanted to introduce this segment with this story because I think today's segment is very profound in understanding all of Scripture. So I actually invite you to sit down with me and let's take our Bibles and let's take our papers and pens and let's go all the way to Genesis, actually. Let's start there. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, at the very beginning of the Bible, we get a very important piece of information. Verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Well, it's very important to understand that we were created in God's image. This is the same word that is used later on in Genesis 5 to say that Adam had a child in his image. This is not something just strange between God and human beings. This is the word that is used for descendants. Adam had a child in his image. And as any parent does when the child is in trouble, he jumps into the pool or goes wherever he has to go to rescue the child. And this is what happens later on in chapter 3 of Genesis. The children of God are kidnapped by a kidnapper that comes along and just tells them that God doesn't want the best for them. And unfortunately, they go with him. And God starts giving this covenant, which he will repeat throughout the Old Testament. I'm coming back for them. As a matter of fact, he says to the serpent on Genesis 3:15, I'm going to crush your head. I'm coming back for these children. These are my children in my image. I'm not going to leave them here. Are you kidding me? So what he does throughout the Old Testament, he tells us that he's coming back many times. He tells this to Noah after Adam, and he says it to Abraham, and he says it to Moses and to David, and he repeats this covenant that he is our God and we are his people. So we find this covenantal sentence throughout the Bible from beginning to end. I am their God and they are my people. Now, why would God be so into coming back for us? Why didn't he just create a new human race? I mean, he can do that anytime, right? Well, that would be like thinking that, well, one child is gone. That's okay. I can create another one. We're replaceable for God. And there is a concept that I need you to know before we start, and it's the concept of the goel. You know what the goel is? The goel is it's a Hebrew word anyways, like Noel, like Christmas, but with a G, goel. The goel was the kinsman redeemer. It was the closest of kin. He was the one that would come and actually take the close relative out of slavery. He would be the one that would pay the ransom. And he would pay the ransom and get them back, or pay the price for the land that they had lost. Actually, the goel had several roles, like get descendants for the dead brother and marry the widow. In this case, I'm going to tell you something that's going to blow your mind away. God calls himself our goel in the Bible. Every time you see the word redeemer, every time you see the word redeemer, it's the word goel. I have goeled you, he says in Isaiah, constantly. Don't be afraid. I have goeled you. I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. So throughout the Gospels and in the Bible, we get this reminder that our ransom is being paid for us. And we get little micro versions of this big covenant that God has made with us in different parts of the Bible. For example, we get it in Exodus, and then we get it in the exile again. We constantly get these micro versions of the big covenant that Goel has made with us. And this is very important to understand, because when God made us in his image, he becomes our closest of kin, and he obligates himself to a rescue package because he is our closest of kin. So he comes and redeems us. One of those times where we see this is in the Exodus. The Exodus is a micro version of this covenant, and we need to understand this so that when we get to the Gospel of Luke, we understand what's going on. When Moses goes to talk to Pharaoh, chapter 4, verse 22 and 23 of Exodus, that's what he says. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. But you have refused to let him go, and then your first son will die. It's very important to understand that the whole Exodus is a micro version of the plan of redemption. Very important, because we're going to need that for Luke 9 in our next segment. So here we go on, and you know how it works. On chapter 12 of Exodus, we're told of the Passover lamb. The Passover lamb was actually the price that was being paid. It was the blood of the lamb. And whoever had the blood on the doorpost, they would not die. Judgment would pass over. That's where we get the Passover part. Well, you know the story. On chapter 14 of Exodus, God delivers them, redeems them in a mighty, mighty way. And he opens the Red Sea, actually the Sea of Reeds, and does for them what nobody else could do. And you know what? Something happens to them. They all grab their forks. They start singing about this great redemption that the Lord has done for them. Chapter 15 is called the Song of Moses. And they sing praises to this God that has redeemed them, has goeled them. Verse 15, the people you have goeled, that you have redeemed. We're going to the promised land. We're gonna walk these 40 years with a fork in our hands. Of course, they didn't know it was going to be 40 years left. But I invite you to live with your fork in your hand.
You're watching Jesus 101.
Welcome back to Jesus 101. We're picking up where we left off. Here with a fork in our hands. Remember the story of the lady that was dying and asked to be buried with a fork in her hand because the best was still to come? Just as when she had a lunch time and somebody said, keep your fork, she knew the dessert was coming. Well, we have a guarantee from our Goel, from Jesus Christ, who is our closest of kin, who created us in his image. We have a guarantee that he was going to come and actually pay our ransom and set us free, like the kinsman redeemer always did for the closest of kin. Now, this covenant that God has made, well, he comes and does it in micro versions of the big covenant. You know, we have Adam, we have Noah, we have Abraham, we have Moses, we have David, constantly being reminded, actually, that the covenant is happening, that the Redeemer is actually coming, that he was going to pay our ransom. And we discussed in our previous segment the fact that we have micro versions of this covenant, and one of those very important micro versions is the Exodus. And we talked about how God said to Pharaoh in chapter 4, verse 22 and 23, Israel is my son, so you got to let him go. If you don't let my son go, my firstborn, something's going to happen to your firstborn. So in chapter 12, we're told of the ransom that was being paid, the Passover lamb and the blood that would be on the doorposts. And whoever was under the blood, they were safe. And judgment was passing over them. And so in chapter 14, God does this great delivery. He redeems his children and his son Israel. And on chapter 15, we left off there, we have this exuberant song. It's a song of flamboyant worship. It's praising God for doing what it was impossible to do. And so let's pick it up from there, chapter 15. Then Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. And you can read it on your own. They keep going on and on about Yahweh and God and who he is and what he has done. And on verse 13, we get this word goel. Remember the goel? They goeled you. Goel can be a noun or a verb. Verse 13, in your loving kindness, you have led the people whom you have redeemed. You have goeled. In your strength, you have guided them to your holy habitation. You know, habitation. When I was a little girl, I used to wonder, how did Moses do to teach them this song? You know, I always wanted to know the songs. I was like, okay, how does it go? 1, 2, 3, 4, and everybody started singing. Well, we're going to go back to the Gospel of Luke. Now, don't forget that Luke wants to teach us that all the things that happened to Israel really are micro versions of the whole world. So he takes the topics of Israel and makes them big and says, okay, that was just a symbol of the real thing. And he takes many of those things, like we already discussed, the Jubilee. Well, this is one of the most important ones in chapter 9 of the Gospel of Luke. If you have a Bible, please get it, because I don't want you to miss this. This is unbelievable. You know the Transfiguration account starting on verse 28 of the Gospel of Luke. Well, you know, he is going to talk to us about this moment in which Moses and Elijah actually show up here and talk to Jesus. It is only the Gospel of Luke that records this conversation, this dialogue between Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. Can you imagine the dialogue? But something amazing happens here that we didn't know in the other Gospels. I'm going to pick it up from verse 29 of chapter 9 of Luke, okay? And while he was praying, the appearance of his face became different, and his clothing became white and gleaming. And behold, 2 men were talking with him. They were Moses and Elijah. Of course, this is the whole formula, the law and the prophets. Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets, who, appearing in glory, were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, this is interesting. They're talking, Moses and Elijah, about this departure that he's about to accomplish in Jerusalem. What exactly is this departure that he's about to accomplish in Jerusalem? Well, today I need to show you something in Greek. And you're going to say, well, what for if we don't read Greek? Well, actually, I'm going to show you the interlinear. This is the interlinear Bible. And you have the Greek on top and the English on the bottom. So you can read the English under it. And I tell many people to actually get an interlinear, because some words like this one that you're going to see now are so big, and you still can read them in English, but it's a literal translation. So I'm going to ask the camera to come a little closer so that you can actually read on chapter 9, verse 31 from the interlinear. And here it says, who having appeared in glory, were speaking of the, you see that word in English? Exodus. Exodus. They were speaking to him of the Exodus, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now, this is a huge word, isn't it? Because Exodus was one of those great events in Israel's history. And here, Luke is saying, yes, but Moses and Elijah really are showing up right before Jesus' crucifixion because they are going to talk about the real Exodus. Can you imagine now Moses and Elijah talking to Jesus about the real Exodus that he's about to accomplish at the cross? This is not longer the Exodus from slavery in Egypt. This is no longer the Exodus from 400 years of being slaves to Egypt, now leaving to the promised land. This is the real thing. I want to imagine Moses saying to Jesus, hang in there, Jesus. I've seen their faces when they're free, when they're redeemed. You're about to do the real thing. You're about to set them free. Wow, what a big word. Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about the Exodus that he was about to finally accomplish at the cross. Well, the Goel, our kinsman redeemer, has come. The Passover lamb has been sacrificed. And we're constantly reminded in the Gospel of Luke and in many places in the New Testament, what was the real reason for that lamb? It was a type. We call it a type, a symbol of the real thing, of the anti-type that was Jesus Christ. Because it was telling us that the Exodus really was accomplished at the cross. And those of us that have accepted Jesus Christ as a personal Savior can live with the assurance that we will see our Goel, our kinsman redeemer, face to face. Because it was his blood, really, on the doorpost of our lives that keeps us safe. And the judgment passes us over. And we're going home. And that's the great news I have for you. No wonder we can live with a fork in our hands. And in our next segment, we will see more fork in our hands.
You're watching Jesus 101.
Welcome back to Jesus 101. A moment ago, we were reading Greek, remember? Yes, actually, we were reading the English under the Greek, and we read in the Transfiguration account on Luke chapter 9, verse 31, that Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about the real Exodus, and that was the word in Greek, remember? The Exodus that he was about to accomplish at the cross, because really that's where the real Exodus was completed. That's where the ransom was paid by the Goel. He was the Passover lamb. And so here we have seen how we have micro versions of the covenant in the Bible. And our Goel, our kinsman redeemer, is constantly reminding us that he's really going to come and pay our price, which he did at the cross. Now, let's summarize what we have learned. We have come to the Gospel of Luke from Exodus. Remember Exodus chapter 4, verse 22 and 23? Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, God says, let my son go. Israel is my firstborn. And if you don't let him go, something's going to happen to your son. Well, as we go on, God opens the Red Sea and does this incredible salvation, redemption, through the blood of the Lamb that was at the doorposts. Remember, you can read this from Exodus 12 to Exodus 14. We finally get to chapter 15 of Exodus, and we have the Song of Moses, the victory song, where everybody is singing about how God has redeemed them, how he has goeled them. Well, when we get to the Gospel of Luke, he has taken this and made it much greater. That Exodus really was only a symbol of something much greater. And in Luke chapter 9, verse 31, we read that Moses and Elijah were speaking to Jesus, actually about the real Exodus he was about to accomplish once and for all at the cross in Jerusalem. This is not the last time we hear of Moses. You thought we left Moses at the law, right? Well, not really. He keeps showing up. And because what happens is these were micro covenants of the big thing, of God's covenant with humanity to save us. So when we get to the book of Revelation, well, we have this exuberant worship scenes. Did you know that the book of Revelation starts by saying that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ? And we get 16 worship scenes in the book of Revelation. Everybody praising the Lamb because he has actually purchased from humanity the people back. Remember that Goel did that? Paid the ransom and got the people back? His relatives back? Well, we have these exuberant worship scenes, one after the other, 16 of them at least. And for example, one of the most beautiful ones is chapter 5 of Revelation, where there is this new song that is being sung because Jesus Christ has redeemed humanity. I'm going to read on verse 9 and 10. They sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the book and to break its seals. For you were slain." Remember the lamb that was slain in Exodus? "You were slain and purchased for God with your blood." That was the price. "Men from every tribe and tongue and people and nation." Of course, Jesus Christ is worthy of praise because he has paid the ransom. He's our Goel. He has redeemed us. Well, then after that, we get the plagues. I mean, we have the very similar order as the one we have in Exodus. Let me tell you something else about Revelation. The book of Revelation has 404 verses in the English language, and it has 518 allusions to the Old Testament because it has more than one per verse, because it takes all the things we've seen throughout the Bible and uses them as symbols so that we have words to say, well, all of that was really a shadow of the real thing, of the real redemption. So it will use heavily Exodus, it will use Isaiah, it will use Zechariah and Ezekiel, and it will use all these beasts and these other things that we had in the Old Testament, and we'll bring them now and say, okay, ta-da, this is what they meant all along. That was part of what you had there, but this is the real thing. Now, when we get to Revelation chapter 15, we are again standing by the sea. Very similar to what we had in Exodus 15. And as you remember, Moses and Elijah were speaking with Jesus in Luke chapter 9, verse 31, about the real Exodus he was going to accomplish. Well, now we get this exuberant song. This is now called the Song of Moses again. But we get a little more because we had not fully understood what this was about. Chapter 15, verse 3. "And they sang the song of Moses, the bondservant of God, and the song of the Lamb." Now it says, okay, remember Exodus 15? Remember that Jesus actually accomplished the Exodus in Luke 9? Well, here's saying, we get it again because now we really get it. And so, verse 3, they sang the song of Moses, the bondservant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and marvelous are your works, O Lord God, the Almighty. Righteous and true are your ways, King of the nations." And we go on worshiping in the manner of the Exodus, but now understanding fully that that was the song of Moses. This is the song of Moses and the Lamb, because redemption from Egypt actually was the symbol of redemption from the world. Well, we keep getting this covenantal formula. Finally, he's with them, and he's going to be their God, and they're going to be his people. Remember when we talked from the beginning that God created us in his image, and we are his people, his children, and how he keeps saying, "I'm their God, and they're my children, and they're my people." Well, chapter 21 of Revelation, I want to read it to you, but I want to be by the cross, because this is the pricey ransom that was paid for this Exodus. This is the real Passover lamb. And by the way, I'm sure you know, Jesus died on Passover Friday. So here we have on chapter 21 of the book of Revelation, again, this covenantal formula, but we get the full picture now. Let's read verse 3 of chapter 21. "I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be with his people, and God himself will be with them.'" We're back to the covenantal formula. We're back reunited with our Goel. We're back to where it was supposed to be from the beginning. And you know what this looks like? Verse 4, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain, because the first things have passed away. Oh, like that lady that was dying with a fork in her hand because she knew the best was still to come, like dessert. Well, we can really live with a fork in our hands because the ransom has been paid. It's a sure thing. It's a done deal. And so here we have, it's coming soon. He's going to come and live with us, and there will be no more tears and no more of this bad stuff that you might be going through. So grab a fork and be sure that he's coming back for you.